What's up, champs? Welcome to another episode of the Short Shifts Fantasy Hockey Podcast, brought to you by Keeping Karlsson. I'm your host, Jeremy Versillo, and joining me tonight, my pal and yours, Shams Benamor. Shams, how are you doing tonight, recovering from last week's fantasy heartbreak?
Oh, yeah, well, it's another week, but the thing that I'm really looking forward to is now just the trade deadline, both in fantasy and the actual. So I'm happy to see some of these rumors become facts instead of just seeing, 17 people say Markstrom's going to get traded, but not provide any information on why or how it's going to happen.
I, too, am excited for the trade deadline. I always love Deadline Friday, kind of just watching the TSN stream at my office while I'm waiting. One thing that usually happens around trade deadline, though, is some rookies get called up and get a chance, but we got a treat of that early to start this week. Logan Stankoven, the leading scorer among all players, not just rookies, in the AHL, was called up for the Dallas Stars. He's a undersized but supremely talented player with a really good shot. He had a goal and an assist in his second NHL game yesterday. The goal was a nice job finding a loose puck and just burying it. He also put up 5 hits. He's played more than 15 minutes in both games, in the top 6. And with the Tyler Seguin injury, I think he has a chance to stick around. Would you be adding him, Shams?
Oh, yeah, it feels like maybe it depends on how interested you are with rookies on your team. Like, if you could fit him in for most of his games, maybe, I'm not sure what his schedule's off the top of the head, maybe if there's like a random Saturday you can't fit him in. Sure, but like if you could fit him in for a chunk of games, my opponent was able to stream him yesterday because he had Skinner injured. So like, I feel like if you could kind of fit him in, I would be going for him, but I wouldn't be like making like a big move of like dropping someone significant to pick him up, because right now we not really 100% sure how long the injury is for Seguin, and then also you never know that they might want to send him down or whatnot. So I wouldn't want to make anything drastic until we find more information on if he's going to stick and where.
I agree with that. And to correct what I said earlier, he actually was on the third line, but it was with Wyatt Johnston and Jamie Benn, which is a pretty dang good third line. Additionally, I laugh at this one. I'm just going to mention it because I find it funny. There's been a couple trade rumors circling that include Logan Stankoven in the trade from Dallas, which isn't happening. I would be absolutely shocked if they trade him when they could call him up and probably get just as big of an impact. One final piece, just real quick, to hear the scouting report from Scott Wheeler earlier this year on The Athletic, or actually a couple weeks ago only. He's got a strong release. He can break down defenders in traffic. He's a sneaky good facilitator with power play upside. He sees him as a third-line scorer who plays an honest game, or a high-skill top 6 piece who can play part of the play driver or play finisher. Fans are going to really like him. His size isn't an issue, and it's honestly an advantage more than a disadvantage. I believe friend of the show Victor Nuno is even higher on Stankoven's upside. So good grades all around from prospect people if he happens to be available in a keeper or dynasty league for you, which would kind of be crazy. On to the next news item. Shams, why don't you tell us about the disaster that is the Vancouver-Pittsburg game tonight and what those lines and power play units look like?
Now, it's kind of a mix of one and the other, is that we're seeing the dreaded split power play. Now, I could kind of understand with Pittsburgh because like everyone is hurt and they're maybe trying to be creative. Theirs is Karlsson with Crosby, Raquel, Eller, and Puustinen, which oddly puts Malkin alone with Letang, Smith, Carter, and Benstrom. Keep in mind, Benstrom was traded from Columbus for, I think it was like Alex Nylander, the less known Nylander. And then to kind of complete the road. Now, this is the interesting thing, is that Vancouver actually has players that are good and healthy and can play at the power play, but they decided to split theirs up as well with some weird BS of, hey, like the coach said something on the edge of, oh, sometimes you get bored or need to mix up your power plays. It was something of nonsense there. So they have Miller and Boeser on their own power play with Suter, Garland, and Hronek. And that leaves Pettersson and Hughes with Baines, Myers, and Lindholm. So That one is like a little bit of a mix. I'm guessing I would rather have the Boeser, Miller, Hronek, just because I don't understand why Tyler Myers is in a forward spot on the other power play, but just kind of that situation where I'd say all of these is that no one benefits, because the only ones that would benefit are players like Baines that you probably should be picking up in the first place. So this is just kind of a overall downgrade for all the players.
Agreed. And additionally, with the no one benefits take, this also probably means they're splitting the power plays closer to 50-50 instead of giving a 75-25 or a 75-30 split. Just all around frustrating. I suspect these won't last long. That's always what happens with these wacky power play units. The team realizes it's not as good of an option and goes back to what works. Segueing off of that, Bryan Rust in Pittsburgh is injured for a couple weeks, it sounds like, which is part of what led to this power play shuffle. And that top six is looking pretty rough without Guentzel and Rust. Malkin's playing with Riley Smith and Drew O'Connor, not to be confused with Logan O'Connor, who's done a bit more for fantasy this year. Crosby, Karlsson, and Letang are surviving, at least. Ricard Raquel has pitched in a few points lately and shows signs of life. It's kind of frustrating seeing the Penguins' offense disappear when they play 4 games each of the next 3 weeks. They were definitely a high-priority streamer team for me, and I've kind of lost interest on all of their owned guys except for one who I'm going to bring up a bit later in the show.
One ray of sunshine. Now, it depends on if the team doesn't trade him, is that there is some kind of hints of good news coming from Guentzel, is that he is on LTIR, so he can't come back sooner than March 10th. But I believe it was today or yesterday, he's already on the ice doing like individual work. So that is a good sign that if he's on this pace, that I would be hopeful that once that LTIR time comes up, as I said, March 10th, that he could be potentially around to be able to participate, hopefully not longer than that. And again, assuming, as I mentioned before, there's so many rumors, is that Guentzel is supposedly one of those players on the block.
Guentzel being on an expiring contract is the reason he's on the trade block potentially. From what I've been reading online, it seems like there's a pretty big gap between what Pittsburgh wants and what other teams are willing to give. So I'm not quite sure he's going to move. I think if he does, it may be the end of an era in Pittsburgh and a sign that they're truly going into a rebuild, even with Crosby and Letang and Malkin around. But enough on that. There's another winger who unfortunately got hurt last night, and it may be a bit of a worse one. Tell us about Adrian Kempe, Shams.
So to go through my cacophony injury list, we start with Guentzel, and now we're moving to Kempe. The worst part is that this was like kind of a fluky play at the I believe it was the last minute of the game. He lands early on his arm and injures it. So we don't actually have a definition of exactly what it was other than that video. And what we know is that they're on a Canadian road trip, currently playing in Calgary, but they sent Kempe back to LA for an MRI. And on top of that, that MRI is not scheduled till tomorrow. So right now, even though he's out of the game, we won't know anything until tomorrow. And there are some kind of rumblings. Now, none of this is verified, that there is a potential that this could be longer term. So just kind of keep an eye out. For example, I have him in 2 weeks, and I basically, nothing said for sure, but I'm kind of planning the rest of my lineup for the week without him because they're on a road trip. He's already sent back. Unless he somehow gets a clean bill of health, that we'll find out early tomorrow. Like if you don't get any good news, and that includes, I say no news is bad news tomorrow, I would start prepping the rest of your week without Kempe.
I think you're definitely safe to plan for a Thursday without him, as they are continuing their Western Canada road trip. In theory, the team's back in town Saturday, so maybe they just sent him home to wrap up, or maybe there's some weird quirk with the American team and the Canadian medical staffs and whatever. Kind of weird that they sent him home to get an MRI. You were talking before the show that can't they just give him an MRI anywhere else? With that happening, though, the Kings lines have shuffled a bit. We have the first line of Dubois, Kopitar, and Byfield, and the second line of Moore, Deneau, and Fiala. I'm excited to see, Byfield back up with Kopitar. I think he's done great things the past few weeks. Anybody else who really gets a boost from this, I kind of think this is just a bad for everyone type of injury.
Yeah, definitely. And that's going to be interesting to see because you may not thought of it, but Kempe is actually their top point getter with when you combine goals and assists. So this is going to be damaging for whoever replaces him on power play 1. He might get a bump, but overall that power play hasn't been hitting on all cylinders, and losing a player of that caliber, it's going to be something to see. And so unless they start, Dubois and Fiala pick up their slack, and they started to, it's going to be really a test to see if those acquisitions are going to be amounting to anything with Kempe out.
Other injury news, Clayton Keller is out for a few days, including today, Tuesday, where they're already playing. The coach did say that it will be, quote, a couple days, so it doesn't sound too long-term. Keep your eye on that one for hopefully some more news tomorrow on their off day, as they do play Thursday, Friday. And then a slew of injuries in Philadelphia. Jamie Drysdale week to week. Rasmus Ristolainen week to week. Travis Konecny day to day. What are your takeaways from those?
So the interesting thing is that I was watching a video on TSN about the trade deadline, and then LeBron just kind of snuck in that he's thinking that Drysdale is going to be 4 weeks. So that's a little bit worse than kind of a week-to-week feel. So that's going to be something to keep in mind because it was, I believe, the same shoulder that he lost a lot of time prior. So with him and Risto out, that's going to be interesting to see Sanheim get a lot more time, or at the very least, say a player like Zabula, he's sometimes been put on say the 7th defenseman, sometimes scratch, more of a power play specialist. It'll be interesting to see that what he does with the extra time, because they just need to play him. And you got the random players on top of that, because I think Stahl of all players somehow got a random assist. So I think this is going to be kind of a boost to all defensemen just because of playing time. And luckily for them that, they may not be household names. They did have a stable of defensemen, that they still have 6 NHL defensemen that I would be fine with having on an NHL roster left after losing these two.
Additionally, Sean Walker's name has been in trade rumors, so their defensive core could get even lighter coming up. Although I did hear from Elliot Friedman that Philadelphia believes they are a playoff team and are looking to make playoffs. So while they may not be a buyer, they've probably ruled out selling Sean Walker and plugging in that 15-20 minutes a night with a rookie. On to the more positive news, the outjuries. Well, one more. Andrei Kuzmenko has missed 2 games in a row. Turns out, contrary to what I thought and maybe posted in chat at one point, he is not getting healthy scratched in Calgary already. He is actually, quote, quite sick with a virus. They're hoping that he'll be back for the next couple games, but not quite a panic on Kuzmenko, although I would not be rostering him anyway.
I agree. Basically, it's that kind of thing. It's that I think he was a free agent in my division when he got traded, and I had a free move, and I was able to pick him up, and I just kind of passed. I kind of was tempted to see if I regretted it when he scored right away, but he kind of feels like I was joking with someone the other day that he feels like Verrata. He makes everyone happy right at the start, and then somehow he just becomes in the doghouse and disappears. So even if he is sick, when he comes back, I'm not 100% sure he's going to be put in a position to succeed. So just kind of let him sit in your IR if you have him, and maybe just plan on maybe playing him for that game. He comes back if you have the space, but I wouldn't be, banking my fantasy success on him.
Yeah, I would be worried about counting on him to be a part of the offense in 3 weeks or in 4 weeks, and he probably will be in one of those weeks, but maybe not both. In the pat ourselves on the back realm, I'm glad we preached patience on Tkachuk and Forsling. Both of them came back quite quickly from their respective injuries. Tkachuk having a great game today, I believe. I think he's got at least 2 points. Valeri Nichushkin is back from the player assistance program. I'm glad that he was able to get right. He is practicing with the team and back on his power play 1 slot that was so lucrative. Believe it or not, despite missing the last 40 days, he is still the Avalanche leader in power play goals. He will not travel on their upcoming Thursday-Sunday road trip, though, so hopefully he'll get in the lineup next week because they have a Monday, Wednesday, Friday schedule. I think this is a general positive, except for maybe whoever's power play 1 slot he is stealing.
Yeah, and this kind of keeps it aligned. I believe it was with Sam Girard, who had kind of the same process. It was about 10-ish days. So, like, even with that it wasn't like a physical injury, being away from the rink, you need that time to condition. So hopefully he has that time, and with that, he'll be able to kind of just get back on the ice. Maybe you might have a jittery day just getting used to people on that first game, but I believe, second game at the very least, he should be in a position to turn it on and be back to his normal self.
And not traveling with the team for Thursday, Sunday kind of helps ease him in. He'll probably practice on his own or skate on his own at the rink without having to jump straight into the stressors of a road trip, which often can be the undoing of players' mental health. Another long-term returnee is Joseph Woll, the long-forgotten goalie on the Leafs, who got injured much earlier this year but had been playing really well. He's been recalled from his conditioning stint, but no update on when he'll be activated. Ilya Samsonov kind of got lit up today, with Jones backing him up. I'm not sure if that's going to push them to activate Woll sooner. I don't think there's much of a concern from the Leafs side over needing to win games, but I expect that he'll be back in the lineup soon, and if anything, this may end up as a 3-headed monster in goal, which we all hate.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the idea, is that, this is the team I was pausing thinking, is like, hey, they're actually interested in playing Martin Jones, but this is a team that traded for Matt Murray, so I guess, they see something in goalies that we don't, so that might be something to keep in mind, is that they seem to be kind of being careful with Woll, but at the very least, with, as you said, that Samsonov has been, he's been doing well, but he quickly can be cold as he is hot. So we might be in a position that maybe Martin Jones gets the next start with just getting lit up, and then maybe we'll see where Woll is and then get a little bit more clarity at that point. But I wouldn't be surprised if they kind of platoon goalies for a little bit, and then if someone takes to raise, then they can kind of make the decision, because I wouldn't be surprised. I don't believe Martin Jones is waiver eligible, and I think he's probably done enough that he would probably get claimed. So that kind of is that, even if they don't want to, they might kind of have to be forced to do the 3-headed monster approach.
Yeah, that's kind of a sticky situation, because especially with Woll coming back from a pretty serious injury, you don't want to let Jones go because he likely gets claimed by someone else, and if Woll gets hurt again or struggles to get back his game, all of a sudden you wish you had that backup, because honestly, Jones outplayed Samsonov for a good portion of that. It's a not fun situation for a team, but I'm sure they'll figure it out. One last one before we go into break, just real quick. Justin Falk has been activated on the blue line in St. Louis. Big thing there is that's just another guy who's going to eat up minutes, and Perunovic coming back too. It's kind of taken away from Parayko and Krug's interest. We're going to actually talk a bit more about Parayko in a couple minutes. With that, let's take a quick break, and then we'll hit you with some hot-cold streaks. Welcome back, everyone. While we were away in that short time, our guy, Logan Stankoven, scored the first goal of the game against Colorado, a minute in, from Wyatt Johnston. That Dallas young core is one of the scariest in the league right now. On to another hot young gun. Tyson Forrester in Philadelphia has returned from a short absence due to injury and has been absolutely on fire. Before this episode, when I was researching, he had played 2 games with 3 goals, 1 assist, 7 shots, and 3 hits, averaging 20-plus minutes a night. I've been kind of watching the Wes McCauley scorebug in our Discord, and I know Forrester has at least another goal and an assist tonight. Shams, maybe you have the latest. but is this a go at him now type of situation?
Oh yeah, I am kind of on that boat. And the funniest thing is I believe it's a goal assist, is that I picked him up yesterday. I kind of gave up a move from a defenseman just to make sure I could grab him. And my main interest was, he's always playing with Couturier. And, playing with Couturier, being the top line, that's going to be golden. But he actually is playing today with Scott Laughton and Owen Tippett. I'm not sure where those goals came from, but the nice thing to see is that even away from Couturier, he's still producing. That just kind of shows that good play. And prior to the injury is that I know that we always talk about Tortorella as, he's a player's worst nightmare and everything. But when he has your back, he has your back. And I remember just seeing tweet after tweet or quote after quote of Tortorella raving about his defensive play. So I feel like he's kind of in that same house of favoritism. I'm not saying he's the same skill, but he's kind of with Konecny that he's, unless something big happens, I don't think he's going to get randomly scratched or randomly benched. So I feel like even if he has a cold game or two, that he's going to be in that position to score and then produce. So right now, the way I look at him is, I'm not saying from a player-wise, but kind of like a Slavkovsky, a player put in a position to succeed, and he's succeeding. And sadly, you have to keep an eye on it because right now we're seeing kind of Slavkovsky cooling off. This could cool off as well, but before it does, he is red hot, and he could be a player to help you get into the playoffs. And if he continues, maybe even win a league because he's, wasn't going to be drafted anywhere. So pick him up if you still have the chance.
I think I'm more interested in Stankoven than in Forrester, but you're right about Tortorella having some great things to say. Even when he returned to the lineup a couple games ago, there was a quote about how they really like his intensity and need him in the lineup, and he really helps the team when he's there. He's one of those guys that's a Tortorella-style player, and I'm sure all of you know exactly what that means because it gets used so often. Next up, the guy who's kind of taken the fall for Forrester to return and has really been struggling. Cam Atkinson is ice cold. No points in his last 11 games, trending down towards 10 minutes a night, and then healthy scratch today. I was going to call him a snoozer, but then I checked the Cupful ownership, and he's only 15% owned in Cupful, so maybe I was a snoozer not bringing this up earlier. Good job to all the listeners for ditching him while he was completely irrelevant for, it's been more than just the 11 games. It's been the better part of 2 months where he's been pretty bad.
Oh yeah, it's basically the idea was, I know some people were kind of like, well, he's a right wing. Maybe, that's kind of shallow and you need to find your players, but this is not it. So for those 15%, show me your roster and I will show you probably 10 people that you could probably start over him.
Yeah, there's a lot of options, even if you're just streaming, or you could go add Stankoven or Forrester over Cam Atkinson. That's an easy choice. On to some defensemen that I promised we'd talk about earlier. Marcus Pettersson is on a hot streak, and I'm going to be very tentative with this endorsement because I want to be clear that this is more a schedule endorsement than I think he's relevant endorsement. But he does have 5 points in his last 5 games played, 7 in his last 10. He's getting a reasonable number of shots and blocks. He's got 4.12 Cupful points per game played over the last 30 days, which is only 9 games, and 3.29 on the season, which is fringe relevant. But as I said earlier, Pittsburgh plays 4 times each of the next 3 weeks. Although it is Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, all 3 weeks, which isn't the best schedule. Actually, it's one of the worst for a 4-game schedule. The odds of you being able to fit a defenseman are higher than another position. I know I've had only 3 defensemen on my roster for a lot of the season, and with other guys getting off days, you may find you can fit him all 4 days in multiple of those weeks. So I added him, and I'm just going to kind of ride it out. Anything else you've got to add here, Shams?
So to go with you with that is that he did have a streak with getting a lot of points as a streamer before. I think Lewis had him, and I remember him talking about having a nice point streak before. So he's not forward to that. And then also something to keep in mind is that he is getting a lot of minutes. So he's kind of in that position, even though that the team is kind of decimated from a forward position. It's nice to see that, they still have, Malkin, Crosby, some high-end talent that, when you're there for like 23 minutes, you're going to fall into points with even like marginal players. And with those high-end, anything can happen. So I'm with you with 4 games and that talent and that ice time. That is something to be able to reproduce over time, most likely.
In addition to getting a lot of minutes, a lot of those minutes he's actually getting with Kris Letang, because that's his D partner. But also I've noticed from watching, the Penguins seem to really like putting that pairing out there with the Crosby line as like a 5-man unit, as opposed to, 4 forward lines and 3 D pairs and mixing and matching. They start a lot of offensive zone faceoffs with those 5 players. So it's even more of a boost because the Crosby line has been the only line doing anything in Pittsburgh. I'm hoping to fall into, 2 points a week and some decent shots, hits, and blocks from Pettersson the next couple weeks. We'll see if that happens. And actually, to segue over, the guy I dropped to add Pettersson in one league and am going to drop in Cupful soon is a guy who had a very similar run. Colton Parayko has cooled off quite a bit. He's only got 1 point in his last 7 games. The peripherals have dried up too. In the month of January, he was averaging over 2 shots, about a hit, and 3 blocks per game. In the month of February, he's averaging 1.5 shots, about a hit, and 2 blocks per game. And if you think of it from a cupful points per game standpoint, half of a shot and a block per game is 0.75 cupful points per game, which takes him from being a decent bottom of the roster guy to someone who is firmly in your waiver wire pool. It's the difference between, a 3.5 and a 2.75, or a 4.0 and a 3.25. So I'm good cutting Colton Parayko. He does have a good schedule next week, but I'm taking advantage of the Tuesday, Wednesday back-to-back and then streaming him out for 3 starts to end the week. Another hot streak, and a cold streak coming up actually, the Winnipeg Jets. Gabriel Vilardi season is back, and Cole Perfetti is now Cold Perfetti. What do you have to say on these two, Shams?
I think it's kind of more of, for Vilardi, it's the fact that Connor is back and Sean Monahan is just fitting in so well on that power play. So Vilardi now has better line mates on both of those ends, because beforehand, I remember just kind of without Monahan, that power play was just kind of in a bad stink. Now it's performing a lot better. So that kind of situation, and I would be expecting, obviously with that kind of talent on the power play and on, playing with Scheifele and Connor on the first line, I don't see that going anywhere. Now, and the worst part is me being as high is that, like, if somehow he's probably, I'd say in Kikuffle, I would be vastly surprised if he's not 100% owned already, but maybe in your Yahoo leagues or other leagues where maybe it's a little bit more shallow, you only got 10 teams, or, you got some clown leagues, as, Dave Benton would be saying, is that this would be a person to make sure that, hey, he's around, pick him up. And sadly, on the other side is that while he has a history with high draft pedigree, if I remember correctly, and had some good time, Cole Perfetti, I would be running away as quickly as I can, because there's situations where, let's see if I can remind myself with the quote. He's literally, like a week or two before, they said, hey, the coach said, I don't like playing Perfetti as a winger. I see him as a center. And then he started playing on the wing, and they asked him, hey, why are you playing Perfetti on the wing? And he says, and I quote, tried to keep him in the lineup. Literally, they're like, hey, if we kept him at center, they could not keep him in the lineup. So they're trying to keep it. So, like, he's getting close to Atkinson territory of being scratched. So that is just a scary, We've already talked about some high upcoming players like take any of those, I would be, hell, I would take Parayko at this point over Perfetti, assuming you can get all of his games. Like, this is a drop now. Like, just to add to the point, I would literally just hit the drop button and then think about the ad coming up. That's how low I am on Perfetti right now.
To add to that, you mentioned that he's entering Atkinson territory. Well, Atkinson's abysmal 0 points in 11 games is topped by Perfetti's 0 points in 13 games. The last 2 games, he saw 10:42 and 7:44 of ice time. He hasn't done much today. The Velarde line actually has 2 goals at even strength today. I think the keeping him in the lineup comment was the fact that they probably can't play him as a third or fourth line center, and obviously Monahan is the second line center. But it's one of those things where I personally find that younger players often fade late in the season, probably due to the NHL season being more games and more physical than a college or junior season. So yeah, he's a complete cut anywhere except for a dynasty league. He's 38% owned in Cupful, although I think some of those may be just the streamers that people have, but get rid of him as soon as you can. On the other side, Gabe Velarde with 5 goals, 5 assists over the last 5 games, 8 of them on the power play, which is awesome for those leagues that also reward power play points, unlike Cupful. They're relying heavily on their power play 1 recently. The past 4 games, when this stretch has happened, Power Play 1 has seen no less than 70% of the ice time and as high as 88% of the ice time, which is up in like McDavid, Drysdale, Nugent Hopkins territory. I will say that's probably a bit misleading because when you score that many goals and don't give the second unit a chance, obviously you're going to have most of the ice time. They have not scored a goal today though and still have 70% of the power play time on ice. I still like Velarde long-term as long as he's on Power Play 1 and playing with Scheifele. Another hot streak, Jonathan Marchessault has been actually on one of the hottest long-spread hot streaks I can remember recently. He's over a point per game for his last 20, which normally he sits in a 65 to 70 point pace range. He actually really turned it on after Eichel got hurt with 13 goals, 6 assists in 15 games played since then, and an additional goal and assist tonight. Also, he's done all of that with only 1 power play point, which I had to check a second source because I did not believe it when I saw it. He's totally running hot. He is not shooting enough to have, 13 goals in his last 15 games. He's only shooting, 3 times per game. So the percentage is way up there, but he's getting himself into good positions and honestly looks like the dominant Conn Smythe winning player that we saw in the Cup run last year.
Yeah, with all those injuries, like, someone has to pick it up, and he's taking the mantle, especially with Stone out as well. There's, not to say much about the other players, is that, there's no Riley Smith. It's just him and Karlsson right now, and then maybe on the forward side, you say Stevenson or Stephenson, I forget how to pronounce his name, is that he's like the last kind of like biggish name player. Than the rest is, if you look at their lineups, it's actually kind of surprising if like, unless you're in a fantasy league, a deeper one, or are just like really into hockey, there's just like a pile of names that you just might not even like recognize. So it is surprising that with that, he's still able to do it. He's, as you mentioned, Conn Smythe skill is that it's there. So they're leading on him. He's producing, and be interesting to see once Eichel comes back to see his placement, if he's back with him on the top line, or if he's keeping with Karlsson, or if they try to spread it out. So it'll be something to watch, but he does have the skill to do this. So even without the shots, I wouldn't be too worried, but it is something to keep in mind. Maybe if you want to be overly tricky, I wouldn't have the guts to do this, but we are talking about the fantasy trade deadline coming up. If you could fish for something big, you could be like, hey, look at this, 20 game streak. Nothing's going to stop. This is bank, and then try to get something out of it. Maybe him plus another player, but I would be happy with him on my roster. I would be hesitant to acquire him because of what we just said.
I think that's very fair. Another downside is for fantasy playoffs, he only plays 2 games in finals week. He does play 4 games in semifinal week, but 2 games in the final week kind of hurts. And actually, I just saw a scoring update. He's been credited with a second goal tonight. The funny thing about that second goal, it is an empty net tip-in. I just watched the replay. He tipped it at the far blue line, like the same way you'd be like redirecting a shot. And so it's a tip-in from 150 feet away, and it's kind of a silly-looking goal. But, more points for Marcia Show owners.
I feel bad for whoever got that assist, assuming that it was going to go in anyway.
Yeah, I think it was Pietrangelo, and it definitely looked like it was going in, and I don't know why he redirected it at waist height from that far out. Last but not least, you brought up, right before the show, a hot defenseman you wanted to talk about.
So just kind of a reminder is that we talk about snoozer territory, about people stuck on your roster that shouldn't be. Now, this is kind of the reverse one. Is this Gostisbehere? He's not really much of a stat stuffer. He's not going to give you a lot of hits and blocks, kind of. But what he does, he is a power play specialist. He gets his goals and assists. And for a while, that dried up. So a lot of people were saying, hey, drop him. We were in that camp as well. If your goal scorer's not going to get you goals, it's only going to get you like a hit and a block, one could cut full point every game. That's a way to stop. But the interesting thing is that he has 2 goals and 4 assists in his last 6 games. And I believe he has at least 2 goals, if not more points today, because, my God, I think they got 8 points against the Capitals. So I wouldn't be surprised if he has more than those 2 goals. So basically that, and the nice thing is as well is that he's shooting again. You had, a couple 4-shot games, and I believe he has a decent amount of shots today as well. So while it was correct to drop him, it is correct to pick him up if he's still available on those waiver wires. And this is right now, as a Wings fan, I don't want to get my hopes up too much, but the last week or so looks like they might be starting to kind of turn on, especially with how they dispatched Chicago on Sunday. That seems like a nice galvanizing thing that maybe helps propel them for the rest of the season, as I say with my fingers crossed.
Totally agreed. It was actually on the Permission to Drop episode a few weeks ago that Derek and I recommended dropping Gostisbehere, and I agree with you now. He was cold then and should have been dropped, but now I'd be checking on your waiver wire to see if he can be picked up. He also, one of my friends pointed out, it's the rare Gostisbehere even strength point. He had a couple even strength points today, although, like you said, they absolutely shelled the Capitals. And with that, our long shift has finally finished. Thank you for joining us. Be sure to give us a follow at ShortShiftsKK, as well as Bryan and Elon at Keeping Karlsson. Use www.gamedaytweets.com to get all the best info from Twitter without having to slog through a mess of things to find your lines and everything. It includes team by team and searchable tweets by player name. Visit that site and the other great sites we use to research our episodes with at Yahoo, Frozen Tools, ShiftChart.com, Icy Data, and Natural Stat Trick. Our intro and outro music were created by Pat Roach, and John Reed is our digital media producer. Until we see you next time, play smart and keep your shifts short.